Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host Faizan Naqi with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy and blessed and fill this world with peace, justice and serenity inshallah, and keep you all safe and blessed in all manners, and hasten the appearance of Imam of our time inshallah. Ameen. Today the topic we are about to discuss is related to the Zionist project and its future, because the project we are talking about is going on in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and it is changing the situation within the Middle East every single moment. Every half an hour, a Palestinian child is being martyred, and he is dying out of hunger or maybe from the bullet or from something else. And in every moment, after even after the ceasefire, there are some kind of bombing and shelling is going on. So we will discuss the situation of the Middle East and the Zionist future of the Zionist project, which is going towards now in Syria as well, where the in after failing in Gaza and committing genocide over there and still going on over there, and after committing that genocide and gaining no results, the tactical results which they were supposed to have, after failing over there, they have moved towards the Syria. So what the Zionist entity is trying to achieve in Syria from their team B, because team A is fighting in within the Gaza and Lebanon, and now the team B, which is ISIS and some proxy people like Zionist Arab Urdugan, they are fighting over there. And what is the situation over there, we will try to get into that detail with the help of our prestigious guest. So I will try to move on to our guest now, and we'll see what they think about it and what they see, how they see the future of the Zionist project in the Middle East. We do have very honorable guest with us, Professor Rodney Shakespeare. He is an analyst and co-author of Binary Economics, and we do have a very prestigious guest, Farah, who is journalist, author, and activist. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm really honored to have you both on the show. Thanks a lot for that. First of all, Professor, I would like you to comment on, like, what is your overview, first of all, especially when we look at the situation of Middle East and the Zionist project, where this project is going, what kind of situation we are seeing, and what are the most important factors we really need to consider when we are looking at the things which we see in news or whatsoever.
I think the key date to understand the situation is October the 26th. And it is not widely understood that Israel organized 3 waves of attack. In the first wave, there were 100 warplanes, planes with missiles, electronic surveillance warfare planes, and of course fighter planes. And somewhere to the north of them was probably an American fuel tanker. The planes went in low and fast over Jordan, which gave them permission. Then into Iraq, which did not give them permission. And when they were roughly 100 kilometers from Iran, the planes found that they were being painted, that's to say, identified by a strong radar, which could have been the new Russian Murmansk radar, or it could have been Iranian radar. Not only that, but interference was taking place with the electronics in the planes. And the situation was such, knowing that having been identified and painted, and the electronic interference, and probably then having to face S-400 Russian missiles or the Iranian missiles. Don't forget that Iran is really rather advanced in these areas. The planes turned tail and fled. They released some missiles, managing to destroy one 50-year-old anti-aircraft battery. They killed 3 or 4 people. But basically, the whole of that attack was a complete and utter failure. They turned around and they fled and they went home. And all the Israelis could say was, all the planes got home safely. Well, of course they did. They never actually really made the attack. But make no mistake, that was the first of what was to be 3 waves, for all I know, 100 planes a time. And the purpose was basically to smash Iran into the ground. So I'll leave it there. Look at the real reality of October the 26th. It was a defeat for Israel, but the purpose was for Israel to smash Iran, and that is still the situation at this moment.
Thank you. Farah, what are your thoughts, what Professor Rodney has said? And if you connect that with the current situation of, especially at the moment going on in Gaza, because it's very important we keep discussing the current situation in Gaza and the kind of massacre going on over there, and people who are suffering in many ways along with the bombing and shelling over there. So can you share some updates on that as well, and what would you like to add on that?
Agree with what the professor has said. I've heard a few people now mention the fact that there will be 3 waves against Iran. The first was to take out the radar stations, and the second was to bomb the military barracks and military bases, and the third was to kind of mop up and destroy whatever else was left. I think Israel relies so heavily on its air force because it has always fought opposition in the region that has not had the same aerial firepower. If we look back on the 6-Day War in 1947, I mean, they bombed all the Syrian and Iraqi planes and Egyptian planes that were on the ground in a preemptive strike. They always claim that they are reacting to other countries who are trying to invade them, but the reality is it's the other way around. Israel is the aggressor, Zionism is the cancer in West Asia, and the philosophy and ideology, the nationalist supremacism of Zionism is the reason why we have had discord, disharmony, disunity and destruction throughout the Ummah and the Levant from long before 1948. If you're talking about Gaza, it's not that long ago that people in and on the different media stations were talking about between 350 and 400,000 Palestinians in the north of Gaza facing famine. I'm talking about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and now they're talking about 70,000 Palestinians in northern Gaza facing basically what appears to be extermination. So the Zionist regime has been able to reduce the population of northern Gaza through starvation, through warfare, through massacres, and through violence from somewhere above 400,000. It was greater, I presume, before Israel started this latest purge and pogrom from 60 days ago, where they failed to allow in food, medicine, water, and basically all the utensils and essentials that we need to survive as human beings. So the Israelis have reduced that population to 70,000. They intend to ethnically cleanse northern Gaza. The settlers of Ben Gvir and Smotrich in the right-wing fascist Israeli cabinet are openly boasting about building new beachfront properties in northern Gaza. They are prepared to murder between 200 and 300,000 people men, women, children, all defenceless, non-combatants, all unarmed civilians. They're prepared to wipe them out just in order to get a piece of land. Gaza's 25 miles by 6 miles. They're going to take 10 or 12 miles of Gaza at the expense of between 2 and 300,000 people. What kind of barbarous, evil, supremacist ideology would actually consider that to be an equal exchange? The death of 300,000 people for the theft of 12 miles by 6 miles of Palestinian land as part of the greater Israel project. I know, as director of Palestine Aid, that people in the south of Gaza are starving because we're helping supply emergency 7-day food parcels, a very limited number, I must admit to. We used to be able to feed 150 families, that's around 900 people for 7 days for $6,000. That same money, just this on the 29th of November, we were able to feed just 101 families with the same $6,000. And the people who are accessing and supplying the food to our volunteers on the ground are not making huge profits. They're not black marketeers who are profiting from the misery and the destruction that we're witnessing in Gaza. These are honourable people, people with integrity, people with morals, who are trying to supply the food as cheaply as they can source it. So we're witnessing an ongoing genocide. I wish we could all do so much more, but at the moment, everyone's hands are tied, while America, which is responsible for every death in Gaza, every death in Lebanon, every death in Iran, and every death in Syria and Yemen, while they continue to back their imperialist project in West Asia, I'm afraid, other than talk and donate limited funds, there's not a lot we can do in the short term.
Thank you, Farah, for updating about the situation. We do have Sister Batul with us. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Batul. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really honored to have you on the show as well. Sister Batul, I would like to know some updates regarding the situation within the Syria and the ceasefire which has been going on since last week. I've been seeing some news like it's been breached as well. So if you can update on the situation over there in Syria, regarding the situation in Syria and Lebanon, both of them, so that we can move forward.
Yes, absolutely. Can I just check that you can hear my voice?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great. So if I just start on the question of a ceasefire, absolutely. I will start off by saying that the greatest strategic defeat to the Israeli occupation entity, the second biggest strategic defeat after October the 7th, was the fact that it was forced and ultimately begged for this ceasefire. You know, it was Netanyahu who called up the chief negotiator, Amos Hochstein. This was last week on Tuesday, which brought about the ceasefire. You know, this was Netanyahu begging and pleading for it because ultimately the Israeli occupation entity on the ground was just bleeding to a point beyond repair. And the entity itself is completely fragmented and in a state of turmoil. And this was definitely compounded by what I would call the kind of Black Sunday that we saw the week before last Sunday, where the Islamic resistance of Lebanon carried out over 50 operations against the occupation entity, which hit the heart of the entity. So you're talking about the Tel Aviv and Gashlan area. Now, for Haifa to turn into Kiryat Shmona, and Haifa is, of course, more south in comparison to the Kiryat Shmona that's in the border. And for that destabilization and that fragmentation to then find itself into Tel Aviv, which is the heart of the entity, was just a red line for Netanyahu. So this was ultimately a surrender that Netanyahu put forward, and was a great strategic defeat. In terms of why Syria is being targeted now, the targeting of Syria is America's plan B for a new Middle East. So America's plan A relied on the Israeli military action to defeat the Islamic resistance of Lebanon. That is what the signaling of the green light for Israel to go into Lebanon late September was all about. This idea of dealing a decisive blow to Lebanon, restoring the deterrence that Israel lost in October the 7th in Lebanon, given it hasn't managed to achieve anything on the ground in Gaza. And so the idea that America had was that for Israel to defeat the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, of course, we saw the pager attacks, the assassination of the top leaders within the resistance, followed by the Secretary General himself. The idea was that after defeating the resistance there, Israel would deploy their forces through the Golan Heights to attack Syria, and they would activate their takfiri mercenaries, so the likes of Tahrir al-Sham, al-Qaeda, Nusra, who would rise in northwestern Syria to ultimately overthrow the Syrian government. And then from there, those terrorist forces would then spill over into Iraq, reminiscent of what we saw in the past decade, to topple the Hashd al-Shabi resistance in Iraq. And of course, we've seen Netanyahu even address the Iranian nation. So the idea would be to unleash covert networks within Iran. So, hundreds of thousands of them anti-government individuals who are paid and sponsored to come out on the streets to wreak havoc, to ultimately weaken the Iranian government. And so the whole kind of resistance axis gets targeted and coordinated in this strategy. But this strategy collapsed. It collapsed when Israel's military aggression in Lebanon was met with significant resistance, which led to, as I mentioned, Israel begging for a ceasefire. And so this marked that strategic defeat of the Israel 2.0 project, of Israel achieving and establishing this quote-unquote new Middle East. If we remember, in the turn of the 21st century, this was America's idea. So the idea was that now Israel was almost in a make or break moment where it would be carrying out that functional role on behalf of America to kind of prove itself to America. Failure of Israel to achieve this new Middle East project just means that Israel is going to further weaken and disintegrate. But given that Plan A failed, and that is for Israel to be in control of the situation, America turned to Plan B, which it sought to achieve through political means what Israel couldn't achieve militarily. So Israel failed to weaken the Islamic resistance of Lebanon militarily on the ground. Let's try to do that politically. Rather than relying on Israel, America is now focused on undermining the resistance in Lebanon by influencing the Lebanese political landscape as well. So key to this strategy is the involvement of the US Special Forces, also officials like Amos Hochstein, who are actively working to encourage the Lebanese army to help in disarming the resistance and weakening its position in Lebanon. So what is the importance of Syria in all of this? This new phase underscores the importance of Syria to us in America's broader Middle East strategy, because Syria acts as a logistical hub for the resistance axis. So it's central to any attempt to dismantle the resistance axis that's opposing the US. You have to target Syria. So we've seen America in the past decade training and arming their terrorist mercenaries. So building upon that operation of Timber Sycamore, which sought to destabilize Syria, topple its government by using the terrorists. And also, it's important to mention the resurrection of the sectarian divisions. So it's not actually in America's interest right now for Israel, on top of Israel being a failure, for Israel to attack Syria from the Golan Heights. They're letting their terrorists do the job because they don't want it to seem to the Muslim Ummah in particular that Israel and the terrorists are both hand in glove and both fulfilling the same strategy and the same goal and objective. So one of the underlying objectives of America's strategy is to reignite the sectarian tensions. This was a tactic that they also utilized during the so-called Arab Spring. So this was when Turkey was positioned as a sponsor for the Islamist groups across the region. The idea was that they would fight the quote-unquote Shia pole led by Iran. And so by promoting sectarianism, America aimed to weaken the resistance axis to further divide the Muslim Ummah, and they considered the likes of Daesh, ISIS, Al-Qaeda and Tahrir al-Sham, who hold those inherent sectarian ideologies to be the key instruments and tools of America for this divide and conquer strategy. And so I think it is important that the resistance groups, particularly in Palestine, that they are vocal about this dimension of the American soft war to exploit sectarianism. But the reality is that the resistance axis has highlighted in this past year the real threat that it poses to the imperialist project in West Asia. Following the events of October the 7th, we've seen ultimately the unity of the resistance fronts, which has weakened Israel, which, as I've mentioned, now faces that internal fragmentation and that existential challenge. So I will say that just as the resistance axis prevented the spread of terrorism in the past decade and ensured Syria's survival, its success in absorbing that initial shock that we saw in Aleppo through Aleppo's capture by the terrorists is even more crucial today. The resistance axis will not allow Syria to fall and will recapture all those areas seized by the terrorists in due course, because Syria is very, very important. Syria acts as a corridor for the resistance, and so more than anything, Syria needs to be able to breathe, and Syria cannot fall. Syria is ultimately open ground. All effective sides of the resistance, from Lebanon to Iraq to Palestine, rely on it for weapons transfer, for intelligence, even building their infrastructure hubs. So, for example, you see Iranian weapon factories and scientific centers are there. God knows if even the underground structures of the Islamic resistance of Lebanon, like the Imad 4 facilities, is based in Syria. And the resistance also takes advantage of the absent rules of engagement in Syria to be able to also strike from there. So it's important that we understand what all the motives and all the goals of all the different sides are. So it was the former US general and NATO commander Wesley Clark who revealed in 2001 that the US made plans to overthrow the governments of 7 countries in 5 years, which, by the way, included Syria, also Iraq, Lebanon, Iran. It was the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert who stated explicitly that President Bush had told him that, "I want Assad to know that the road to Washington passes through Jerusalem." So this idea of normalizing with Israel was what was required from Bashar al-Assad to avoid the civil war. So the civil war was all to do with the fact that Bashar al-Assad was a part of the resistance axis and was not willing to abandon it. Even today, we see the UAE and Saudi Arabia come forward to Syria, asking it, almost bribing it, like we will remove your debt, for example, just to forego support for the resistance. And of course, they say this, but it's all empty words, because the moment Bashar al-Assad makes those concessions, they will drop him like a hot potato. But of course, the West, it wants to cover its support for the terrorists like Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and Nusra. But the facts, they speak for themselves. You have the WikiLeaks documents of Hillary Clinton stating Al-Qaeda is on our side, or the best way to help Israel deal with Iran's growing nuclear capabilities is to help the people of Syria overthrow the regime of Bashar. But you also see the role that Turkey has played in this kind of strategic position that is serving as a bridge between the East and the West. As a NATO member, it's played this integral part in the US strategy for the region, and Turkey is an entity that has considerable maneuverability, and it balances also its relationships with Russia and Iran, whilst navigating its heavy involvement in Syria. But ultimately, it is serving the functional role of the Western-led strategy. So Turkey is Al-Qaeda and Nusra, and all those terrorists are in addition to the Kurds. So America signaled for the Kurds to move from areas in Aleppo that they were in to make way for the Turkish forces and the terrorists. I think they moved them to the area of Al-Bukamal that was in the border with Iraq, so that they can focus their efforts in confronting the Hashd al-Shabi, which is the resistance that was making its way and that continues to make its way from Iraq into Syria. So that is the situation in Syria. The resistance will not allow Syria to fall. The ceasefire in Lebanon is an admission of the defeat of Israel to achieve anything on the ground. So do I think Israel will return back to war? No, I don't believe it will return back to war, despite having broken, by the way, the ceasefire dozens of times from since when it was enacted last week. This has everything to do with trying to shake the morale of the Lebanese population. Israel can't stand the fact that in the northern front, still its settlers haven't returned back to their homes because they are too afraid of the instability. They're scared that the resistance might even strike. They're scared of even their own imagination. But they can't stand the fact that one day after the ceasefire, you had hundreds and thousands of Lebanese people returning back to their homes. So it's an intimidation tactic more than anything. But if Israel wanted to continue the war, it wouldn't have stopped in the first place.
Thank you, Sister Batul, for updating about the recent situation in Syria and Lebanon. Professor, I would like you to share some views regarding, especially the Arab Muslims versus Iran, and then obviously versus, you can say, Zionist ideology. So what they are trying to do, I mean, without the help of Arab countries, do you think the Zionist project is successful in the Middle East? And how do you see the whole situation? What sort of world we are living in? How do you view this whole situation, which Sister Batul has mentioned, and some of the parts Farah has also shared about the Gaza situation? So, if you would like to add something about that as well, you are most welcome to do that. And you can also share some view on this, on the each role of each party, for instance, like Arab, Muslim, Iranian, leader, excess of resistance, you can say, the role of Zionist entity, how long they can go for such war in the whole region. I mean, because they are getting weaker every day, every moment in their own country as well. So how do you see that?
Yes. You ask about the Zionist project, and Farah referred to the Greater Israel Project. I think that was his phrase. Zionism claims that it has a right to recreate what they considered existed 2,000 years ago. And that is an empire extending from actually the river Nile across to the river Euphrates. You have to take a long time scale on this. At any one stage, from the perception of the Zionists, the thing could go backward, but then they look forward to going forward. And that is the framework in which you have to look at how you foresee at least the intent of the Zionists in the future. Now, there are many, many aspects to this, but one of the troubles with Hezbollah, for example, is simply that the land which is now occupied by Hezbollah is claimed to have been land occupied by the Jews 2,000 years ago. This is preposterous stuff. If you take who was present on land 2,000 years ago, 500 years ago, in the United States, the land today would be owned by the Native Americans. 500 years ago or 600 years ago, the land in South America would be again owned by the Native Americans. The whole thing is an outrageous fantasy designed ultimately and supported by the West to put in what is effectively an expanding colonialist regime. So with that in mind, I look at the present situation and I say, well, we're only a few weeks away now from a change in American government. Will there be any change in the policy towards this Greater Israel project? And remembering that also in America, behind this are the Christian Zionists. They're more committed to the expansion of Israel, perhaps than anybody else. Well, given Trump's behavior and what he's done, the chances must be high that he will support the annexation of the West Bank. He's already supported the annexation of the Golan Heights. and you then look at the detail of events within, say, Jerusalem, it almost seems to me certain that the Zionists will explode, detonate, blow up the Al-Aqsa temple and say, well, now it's time to build a new temple to the Zionist project. So the whole thing is still there. They take a long-term view. If they get defeated, they stay back. But ultimately, it is an expansion right the way across. And of course, it is a ridiculous fantasy because even in Israel itself, the percentage of the population fundamentally opposed to the regime is nearly half. But at any rate, that is what they're up to. Trump and the Christian Zionists are committed to it.
That's really true. So, Farah, what...
It's under Trump. Sorry. Yeah. I finished. Faisa, I finished.
Yeah, I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, I have finished.
Oh, that's fine. It was stuck a bit, so I couldn't get what did you say in the last, but mostly I've heard what you said. So, Farah, what are your thoughts on what Sister Batul and Professor has mentioned about the situation of the world at the moment? So, how do you see that, how the suppression and oppression would end in Gaza? Because every moment over there is really painful for the people of Gaza, and nobody seems to be talking about it, and nobody seems to be like practically helping them because they don't have food, water, all kind of help which they really need. So how do you see that situation over there, and what would you like to add in the discussion regarding what Professor said and the Sister Batul has mentioned in her discussion?
Well, I'd like to sadly say that I don't see anything good coming to Gaza anytime soon if the Israelis genuinely plan to try and either exterminate or kind of through an exodus of almost biblical proportions to force a second Nakba upon the people of Gaza and indeed the occupied West Bank. The axis of resistance is doing the best that they can, and they have them in my total respect. I believe they are acting within international law and trying to prevent a genocide, a continued genocide being visited upon the people of Gaza. There is a moral imperative on individuals, on organizations, and on countries and states to prevent genocide. And I think that that's what the Lebanese, the Yemenis, and increasingly the Iraqis are trying to do as part of the axis of resistance. I would just like to try and draw a few lines together and add up a few dots. I'd like to mention Georgia, because if you watch what's happening in Tbilisi, I have seen a video which is widely being shared on social media of a huge crowd marching through Tbilisi, carrying what I suspect to be the St. George nationalist flag of Georgia. And the people at the front of the march that I saw were carrying Ukrainian flags. We are witnessing a Maidan Square Mark II take place in Tbilisi, in the heart of Georgia, where they are intent on regime change. They are going to try and install another fascist regime. Now, I'm simply mentioning this because this is America and Britain and NATO and the EU behind this destabilization of Georgia, which we saw in Ukraine, leading to the devastating results we're witnessing today. It is the same ideology and fundamental fascism that we witness coming from Israel. Now, the one thing that ties these disparate acts together is racism coupled with fascism. So if you look at the racism of the Israeli Zionist government, they care nothing for non-Jewish lives. They care nothing for the people in West Asia and the region. That is mirrored, as the professor mentioned, in the massacres of the indigenous populations of North and South and Latin America and the Caribbean, and even further afield. This is white supremacism. This is nationalistic ideology and arrogance of a superior race, even in the racist regime in Tel Aviv. People who were brought there, Jewish people who were brought there from Ethiopia, because they're black, are discriminated against by the state and by their fellow Jewish people within the nation. So when you put racism and fascism side by side, you end up with what I believe is terrorism, the use of violence upon a civilian population in order to carry out an ideological or a foreign policy and intervention, which is to the benefit of those who are the racists and those who are the fascists. So Israel is an existential threat against the whole globe. I've just returned from an international conference in Venezuela that was addressed by the president, Nicolas Maduro, on the 29th of November, which is International Solidarity Day with Palestine. He ended his speech by saying Venezuela is Palestine and Palestine is Venezuela. So we have a resurgence of support for the just Palestinian cause, for nationhood and dignity and justice from the global south and further afield. We have a reawakening of the global consciousness of the global population, if not all of the global governments, in favour of the right of return of Palestinians to their indigenous lands and properties. Whether or not Israel is going to disintegrate because of the internal contradictions which we witness, 80% of Israeli society is in favour of turning Gaza into a car park and southern Lebanon into a car park in order for the expansionist Israeli dream of the greater Israel. I've said before that Israeli society pays no price for the acts of violence and genocide being carried out by their sons and their daughters, their brothers and sisters, and their mothers and fathers, who are murdering at will and without accountability people all over West Asia. So long as Israeli society doesn't pay the price that the people of Lebanon and that the people of Syria and that the people of Gaza and the West Bank have paid, then I believe Israeli society is happy to murder as many people as they believe is necessary to obtain their greater views for their expansionist policies. So I'm not sure Israel is going to implode from the inside when so many of them were so willing to support the genocide. I think so long as America supplies them with enough bombs and enough money and enough political cover in the UN and in other spheres of media influence, they will continue to attack anyone, anywhere, at will, and at their leisure. And just one last thing in Syria. I was in Syria in 2010 as part of George Galloway's Viva Palestina aid convoy. We stayed in Latakia for 15 days before getting approval from Mubarak's regime to go to Al Arish and then on to Gaza. I was in Syria again in 2014. I have had the honour to meet President Assad twice when I was a delegate at the World Federation Trade Union Congress, which has been held 3 times in Damascus. President Assad told a room of international delegates that before the war on Syria in 2011, the Americans told him that if he didn't agree for normalization as such with Israel and not to continue to be a bulwark against Zionism, that Syria would pay a very heavy price. He told us in that meeting in the presidential palace on that day that he told the Americans that Syria would not bow its knee to the Zionists, and as such they would remain totally opposed to the Zionist colonial project and in favour of a Palestinian state. That was in 2011, and here we are in 2024 with the Americans and the British, and I assume NATO and Mossad and others, again taking a second bite of the apple to destroy the Syrian Arab army and the Syrian Arab Republic. I hope that they fail, I pray that they fail, and my heart and prayers are with the people who are suffering from Israeli aggression barbarity and inhumanity, which, unless it's stopped, will go on for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, or 30 years.
Thank you, Farah. Sister Batul, I would like your conclusive remarks because we are heading towards the end of the show. Last 20 minutes are left, so I would try to evenly divide in each guest. So, what are your thoughts on especially the situation within the Israel related to Netanyahu? Because we have seen that recently. I've seen a statement like in which they were saying like. Because of Israeli attacks, there were hostages who were killed in that attack. I think so, 30 or something. So, how do you see the reaction of the people of Israel regarding that? And anything you would like to add on about, in general, situation related to Syria and the policy of the Biden government at the moment? How do you see that? What type of policy he is taking forward? So, and how we can see that, I mean, if we have to really see in practical form what sort of actions he is doing which are kind of harming this world or maybe empowering this world, if there is any. So how would you conclude the whole discussion regarding the topic?
Yeah, so ultimately Netanyahu's strategy for the past year has been to toughen the Israeli society up. And that is through the prolonging of the war. Because we have to understand that Israel, it's a society of luxury, not war. The settlers globally, the Jewish Zionist settlers globally emigrate there. There is this idea of it is the land of milk and honey. It is supposed to be a safe haven. It is a default given that it is secure. So what has happened in this past year has gone against the very essence of what Israel is and what it stands for. And this also explains why you have many individuals who were, serving in the Israeli army. They were the occupation forces who decided to resign on the basis of, Israel is not fulfilling its key core values for which it was created, and that is to ensure security for its population. Because where is the security when we are so penetratable? And these missiles can come from all directions and the Iron Dome cannot protect us. And despite the Iron Dome not being able to protect us, Netanyahu is still continuing to prolong the war. So this explains, on that Sunday, that Black Sunday that I described, that was 2 Sundays ago when the resistance launched 50 operations that hit Tel Aviv, a lot of them did. You had over 4.5 million settlers who were in shelters all day in fear and anguish. So yes, the resistance hasn't actually killed Israeli settlers per se. They've not been the target. They've not been a part of the bank of targets of Israel in the same way that, as Farah mentioned, absolutely, the civilians are the target of Israel. That's the whole point. It's to kill as many as possible. It's to weaken the morale. It's like they cannot target military installations because they're under the ground. The capacities of the resistance are under the ground. Or they go for the civilians to turn the civilian population against the resistance. Well, yes, the resistance hasn't killed Israeli settlers. They've not been their target, but it's enough for the sirens to just go off, for them to feel a hysterical sense of fear, for them to want to pack their bags and leave. So this year has just been an expression of Israeli disintegration and fragmentation, and this has seen itself in all stratas in society. So you have the Haredi Jews, for example, that don't want to be conscripted, despite the fact that on the ground you have an army that is literally collapsing because they don't have enough fighters. The fighters themselves don't even have the morale. They're not willing to go to their death trap, basically. And there is a real sense of Israel just completely retardating and going back to square one. So we are approaching kind of the end of the curve when it comes to Israel. And I do believe that politics runs on power and ability. The weak has no place in the world of politics. Israel's functional role was to act as a disciplinary stick, to strike whatever entity in the region is falling outside of Western hegemony and Western goals. Israel is ultimately controlled by its hegemonic Western master. But Israel has failed to fulfill the functional role for which it was created for. And as I mentioned, politics runs on power and ability. So I do believe that post-war, there will be an accountability for Israel's failures to achieve the goals for which it was created for, and that is to weaken the resistance. It's like, what does Israel stand to do? So that's a big question there. Specifically someone like Netanyahu, I think he's irrelevant. I think he'll be sidelined post ceasefire in Raza as the chief head of army, Halevi said that he would be resigning. It's not a question that Netanyahu would be forced to resign. Biden's policy is one that just basically echoes and mirrors the deep state policy. The deep state likes to settle things through political solutions, tending towards the two-state. As was mentioned by the guests, Trump is the opposite of that. Trump is the type who's pro-annexation. He was pro, the Abraham Accords, the deal of the century, etc. But there's an important point over here to mention, and that is that Trump also doesn't like failures. Israel has to be able to prove that it's able to annex the Golan Heights, that it's able to further, annex the West Bank. But ultimately, Israel is up against the resistance axis that has proven itself on the ground. And Trump is someone that doesn't like failures. So Trump will likely seek to, and he's expressed this to Israel, that he wants the job finished essentially before January. He wants the job finished with respect to Gaza. Now, I know Trump says things also here and there that appear very paradoxical and contradictory and quite frankly manic. But Trump is the kind of guy that's not pro-military wars. He's more pro-negotiations and settlements. And so if he wants to strike an entity, he'll strike them through maximum pressure campaigns and sanctions, etc. So I think moving forward, the prelude of the ceasefire in Lebanon will be ultimately a prelude to the ceasefire in Gaza, because Israel has achieved nothing on the ground. It's not managed to stabilize or achieve any of its goals. So the war will come to an end. No war goes on forever. And Israel will be held to account and will shrink to match its true size ultimately, because politics is not a charity.
Thank you so much. Professor Rodney, what are your thoughts what Sister Batul has said, and also the role of British government in this imperial colonial project of Zionists, in which they are just committing genocide and they are all supporting them through thick and thin, you can say. And how do you see the role of British government and how the role people should play in stopping that kind of suppression and oppression with the help of government?
The British government rules very like the Roman Empire ruled, and it's called divide and rule. The game is this, is that a deal is made with the elite in a country, and the imperialists, in this case it's America and the UK, that we agree to support the elite and let the elite do the suppression of the mass of the population. And that is basically how the Middle East works. And so you have the UK in cahoots with the killer Khalifa in Bahrain. They receive gold trinkets and things from the Khalifa. We have a base there. And we support the Khalifa against the Bahraini population. And if you then look at the true desires of the population, well, if you look at the actual size of the Bahraini population, you could say that the biggest democratic forces in the world are in Bahrain. Though if you actually then go to Iran, and I've had the privilege to be in the revolutionary demonstrations in February, when you get millions on the streets, you don't get that in London, you realize that the way the British government works ultimately is to support these corrupt, autocratic, family-type regimes to suppress the will of the majority there. And that is going on. One quick word on the Sister Anfar. The Israeli project is really about expanding this idea of Israel across lands very widely. And then you say, well, okay, what happens to the existing population? Well, are they going to try and do what the German Nazis did, which they're trying to populate it with their own sort of kind and kill everybody else, though that seems, the scale of that seems a bit unlikely. But there's a fundamental contradiction there. They're expanding, and at the same time, we'll be taking over other populations, though as far as indicating that their policy at the moment is frankly to exterminate them. I mean, it's an extraordinary scene that's going on. You look at the long-term implications of the Greater Israel Project, and they are on the face of it, exterminating millions. And in the meanwhile, the UK and America, we let this project go on, and Saudi Arabia and UAE and Kuwait and Bahrain, they all support it because we are supporting the elite against the majority of the population.
Thank you. Farah, what are your thoughts? Conclusive, how would you conclude the whole discussion? Especially you have been on the conference as well recently, which was regarding Palestine. And when I look at the situation in Gaza and overall, I see like the freedom and liberation of Palestine is the liberation of humanity in general, because we all are trapped in a kind of web which we knowingly or unknowingly we are attached to that, whether we are in war or whether we are living a very happy life, apparently, but we are trapped in that kind of Zionist project. We are part of it in some way. So how important it is for us to bring that awakening, because many thousand people in Gaza and Lebanon has given their life, but still we don't see the kind of awakening there should be. We don't see that. There is, but still there is not. So how do you see this factor and the role of common people on ground to bring that awakening and to do more to stop these oppressive people and the powers, you can say?
History has proven that might is right. When you consider that there was only tens of thousands of white Europeans who invaded the whole and Latin America, it's because they had the most up-to-date weaponry, the most sophisticated arms at the time. The Indians had bows and arrows, and the settlers had guns, and then repeating rifles, and then Gatling guns, and we'll just bring that forward and extrapolate that in time. That goes through to your F-16s and your F-35s and your aircraft carriers and your nuclear submarines. I'd maybe like to quote two people that we've maybe all heard before when it comes to Palestine and resistance in general. Nelson Mandela said that South Africa, the ANC and the Project for Liberation, that South Africans would not be free until Palestinians were free. Bobby Sands, the Irish Republican Army hunger striker who died in a British prison on Irish soil on the 5th of May 1981 after 66 days on hunger strike. He is famously quoted as saying, "There is no job too large or too small for anyone to get involved in the revolution, liberation and standing up for humanity." I'm paraphrasing the actual quote. And I think it's incumbent on everyone to do whatever they can, but that's easy for me to spout that's just pure words. It's almost like a soundbite. Oh, we must do more, we must lobby Parliament, we must get the trade unions involved, we must get as many people as possible out onto the streets. I would simply encourage people who genuinely want to help the people in Gaza and the West Bank, and by extension, I'm going to say Yemen. The Yemenis have been suffering under sanctions and starvation for over a decade, if not longer. We should be doing everything in our power to fundraise, to support projects that are helping displaced and disadvantaged people in Yemen and in Syria for the refugees, and in the West Bank and in Gaza. So people genuinely want to help. Marching's good, having a resolution passed at a trade union congress is good, but they don't affect change, and they are not. I believe solidarity in action is the only solidarity that's worth any value. So people should try and support anything that helps the people on the ground, because the people in Palestine who need us so much now are going to need us even more when this barbarity ends. And we have an axis of resistance that's trying to prevent a genocide. So we should have an access of, I would call it, human spirit and generosity to help support those countries that are most in need of financial medical assistance going forward.
Thank you so much, Farah. We still have 4 minutes. So, Professor, first of all, I would like you to comment on some of the, like, how do you see the future of Zionist project and the dream of Greater Israel? Do you see they would be able to achieve that dream? Or do you see there that is interrupted already? How do you see that future?
Well, yes. In the immediate future, it is linked with the perceived interests of America and of the UK. And therefore, they are going to go on supporting the racist colonial project of the Zionist entity. And it will become more destructive. There's a logic there that, as indicated by Fry, to ultimately they have to exterminate the population because they don't. They'll be outnumbered. There's a great long-term contradiction in the nature of the Zionist project. And so looking at sort of generations ahead, the thing cannot really succeed. But in the meanwhile, they're just going ahead, and it will be, as it is at the moment, a completely destructive, genocidal project. This is also acting at a time when power is shifting in the world, and we should just touch on this before we finish, that unipolar power, which is basically American power, was British, but now gone to the Americans. That is definitely relatively declining. There's no doubt about it. And things are moving to a unipolar world. And the West Asia situation cannot be understood, or at least sort of thought about, except in the context of wider political and economic movements. But that is not going to stop what I fear is going to be an intensification of the killing that's going on at the moment, and of the dirty tricks, which is being supported by that combination, implicitly, or if not explicitly, by Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, as well as the USA and the UK. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much, Farah, and thank you so much, Sister Batul. Really honored to have you all on the show. And to the viewers, I will take a leave over here and would just say that we need to see which side we are on. Are we standing up with the Zionists and the people who are suppressing and oppressing the humanity, or we are standing in favor of the people? So choose wisely, because we are supposed to do that. We are supposed to do, and that's what we are supposed to do. Thank you so much for watching. Allah Hafiz.